Welcome to day 2 of the annual conference, Critical Cases, Understanding and Responding to High-Risk Domestic Violence Perpetrators, hosted by the European Network for the Work with Perpetrators of Domestic Violence. For all those who participated in day 1 of the conference, welcome back. For all of those joining us today, welcome. What's in store for today? Of course, a lot of learning, discussion, knowledge exchange, but in practical terms, we're looking at a keynote speech, a plenary presentation, a mock MARAC, so multi-agency risk assessment conference, a range of interesting workshops, and a final joint feedback session and closing. Just a heads up, for those who signed up to the workshop by Dorota Diakon, How do High-Risk Perpetrators Think, you should have already been notified via email that it has been cancelled and it's been replaced with the workshop on suicide prevention among high-risk perpetrators led by the Drive project. Just like yesterday, we're using this platform for a while, and this is until lunch, and then we're transitioning to Zoom after the lunch break, which means that you will have to click on your selected workshop button to access the designated Zoom room, or you can also use the link that you should have already received via email. It's my role to remind you about buttons as well. Apart from the workshop buttons, there's that beautiful feedback button. Please make sure to send us your feedback before you leave the conference, so click on that feedback button. There's also an upcoming events button that I've been told to inform you about if you haven't found it already, and you can click on there to find out about up-and-coming WWP events. For the closing, for the final feedback session and closing, you can also click on the designated button on the platform. This will be later on in the day. If you have any tech issues, and I know that somebody did have tech issues yesterday, please refresh. You can log in from a different device and try to see how that works out. Or you can also email our tech support at hello@fundraisingeverywhere.com. FYI, if I do mention timings, I'm putting a lot of effort into mentioning that they're in CET, so Central European Time. But if I don't, please remember that they're in Central European Time. And finally, if you want to share photos or quotes or information about this conference on social media, you can do so by using the hashtag CriticalCases23. So hashtag CriticalCases23. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce the Executive Director of the European Network for the Work with Perpetrators of Domestic Violence, Alessandra Pauncz, who will ease us into day 2 with some welcoming words.
Hello to everybody and welcome. It is such a pleasure to be back again this year and welcome everybody in this special occasion that we are hosting together with you. I am going to be opening today with a few reflections on yesterday's before at the end of the conference we move forward towards the future. There were so many interesting inputs in the course of the day. I just have to choose a few because actually we're kind of ready to go for the next roll of input. So I wanted to sort of reflect on some of the inputs from Chris's presentation on what does it mean to unpack high risk. I particularly appreciated this idea both in Chris and Kieran's keynotes about reflection on concepts and things that we're using in our practice, but actually have to sometimes stop and reflect on. And hopefully this is a safe space, our conference at WWP, to be able to do that. So what do we mean? Are we talking about reoffense? Are we talking about severity of violence? How do we assess that? And how do we address it in working with perpetrators? Basically, Chris was very clear he didn't have the answers, but thinking about disruption and support seemed to be really, really crucial elements. I do want to introduce another note that is concerning and that we must keep in mind when we think about high risk and risk assessment, and that is that we should also always remember the concept of high harm. So we may have perpetrators that are low risk or medium risk, but that are doing a lot of harm in victims' lives. So I think we need to balance it so that our evaluation of violence doesn't leave us high harm perpetrators slip through our assessments, and we should always keep that in mind, that when we're looking at the risk, we also need to be considering the harm that these men are doing. In Kira's presentation, one of the things I wanted to address, and I particularly appreciated, is this idea of changing the frame and about how we need to think differently about change, how we evaluate change, and what does change mean, and how do we understand change. And all too often, change is an on-off kind of thing, that you're either completely changed or not changed at all. Can recidivism in and of itself capture change? Change seems to be a much more complex construct in which we have to look at incremental steps towards harm reduction. And I think this is a very, very important point. As another really important point is the consistency of valuation. We do need to bring in professional judgment in the evaluation, but we also need some kind of actuarial and risk assessment structured tools so that our evaluations can be consistent. Then off to the big theme of trauma. Trauma is a very broad term. It is being used a lot now. I think that it's going to require a lot more in-depth reflection. Trauma refers to extraordinary life events and how that impact individual people. Sometimes it's about violence. Trauma can be related to violence, but trauma can be a lot of other things as well. So I think that this is it's a very broad concept. It is a concept that is taken from, it's a psychological construct. I think we need to be attentive of what happens when we transfer psychological constructs into the field of domestic violence. How does the construct, how do the constructs, because there's more than one way of also understanding how trauma works with people and how you work with people that have experienced trauma. So how do these different constructs of trauma stand up to feminist scrutiny? There are very different theories of change around working with trauma. In some cases, they say that you need to address trauma directly. In other cases, they say that you shouldn't, because that can be re-traumatizing. So there's no anonymous consent also on how we intervene on this. So just continuing to ask our difficult question, does trauma-informed practice shy us away from difficult conversations that maybe we should be having with men that cause harm? Do our concerns for perpetrators overshadow some of the concerns that we should be having for victims? So I don't think there's any easy answer again, but just a lot of the questions that came out from yesterday. In conclusion, I mean, we had a lot of other things, but my time is definitely up. Just wanted to remember everybody about our AGM on the 8th of November. For those of you that won't be joining us for the conclusions, won't be with us all day, just want to remind you, you will be receiving emails. Please make sure and read it. Make sure to stay updated with all the wonderful trainings and events that we have in plan for you. So I will, at this point, pass it back to Isotta for the rest of the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alessandra, for seamlessly summing up the key insights from yesterday's presentations and discussions. I think it was very helpful in terms of joining the dots between the different contributions and making better sense of them against the backdrop of the conference theme. Next up is Ola Kurovica, sorry. Ola joined WWP in 2022. She's responsible for re-granting. Together with Berta Val, she has coordinated and implementing the mapping of perpetrator programs that you will shortly hear about in her presentation. Ola has a master's degree in psychology, and before joining WWP, she worked with domestic violence survivors and perpetrators. And as anticipated, Ola's presentation is about mapping survivor safety-oriented perpetrator work among WWP members. Hi there, Ola. You can take it away whenever you're ready.
Hi, thank you, Isotta. Hi, everyone. My name is Ola. As Isotta said, I work for WWP, and I would like to take a little bit of time to tell you about a mapping we have recently completed of how perpetrator programs in Europe work, and more specifically, how they implement survivor safety-oriented practices. This is a summary of a much broader report, and I will say more on this at the end. But for now, I wanted to talk about the most important and interesting findings, some promising practices that we already see that are being widely implemented across Europe, and some critical challenges and recommendations for potential areas of improvement. So first, just to give you a brief overview of how and when we did this mapping. This included 33 perpetrator programs from 24 European countries, all of these members of our WWP network. So we are very, very grateful that members took the time to participate in this mapping. We followed a mixed method approach. We used online questionnaires to gather more quantitative data, and then we also did in-depth interviews with all 33 members to talk a little bit more in depth about how they implement these practices in their daily work, to get more of a feel of a practical implementation of this. When it comes to the scope of the research, we identified 5 major areas that are important for survivor safety-oriented work. And the first one is cooperation between perpetrator programs and victim support services. So here we really wanted to see if there is cooperation. This is, of course, very different in many places in Europe, but also how this cooperation is done, if it is done in practice, and what are the difficulties or challenges surrounding this cooperation. Then we asked a lot of questions about safety of survivors and how this is taken into account in the work of perpetrator programs, both women survivors, and also we had a lot of questions on how children's safety is addressed. A major question about the safety of survivors is also on partner or ex-partner contact. So we wanted to know if programs contact partners of perpetrators, and when and how they do it. Then we focused on risk assessment and management, and here we mostly wanted to know if there's procedures in place in programs to assess and manage risk throughout, risk to survivors, of course. The fourth area was on the gender perspective implementation. So we wanted to see how this gendered understanding of domestic and intimate partner violence is implemented in the work and the structure of programs as well. So how they see it content-wise, but also structure-wise. And then lastly, we wanted to know about evaluation of programs, whether programs evaluate their work, and how it's done, if they do. Just a very brief information on the basic information on the programs that we included in this mapping. Most importantly, all of them work with male perpetrators of intimate partner violence. They also mostly work with other groups. This differs, and there are some interesting takeaways from this as well in the report. I don't have time to go into in detail right now, but all of them work with male perpetrators of violence. And now to tell you a little bit about the results from this mapping. First, on this area of cooperation with women's support services, In general terms, we saw that on average, programs rate their cooperation with victim support services quite highly. You can see here 3.39 out of 4. And half of the programs in the mapping reported having high or very high cooperation with victim support services. This is also shown on the graph, and this is an encouraging result and a good start. But a more in-depth look at the data also showed us that in many cases, there is no protocols for cooperation. And we also, of course, know this came out in interviews a lot, that facilitators mentioned that if there is cooperation, it's not structured, there is no protocols in place to do this. So they often also have to do it, first of all, on their own time, because there is no funding. And also this means that the level of cooperation is heavily dependent on the personal relationships between perpetrator program facilitators and women's support service providers. In practice, this often means that, for example, a perpetrator program cooperates well with one support service in their area, but not others. And we also see this here on the graph that almost 70% of programs don't have protocols for cooperation. I want to mention that facilitators commonly said that they would like to have these protocols, that it would make their job easier, and they really see the value of having this cooperation. However, there's challenges, as I mentioned, around funding, but also around trust and belief in how perpetrator programs work. So I also want to point out here this number of 14.3% of programs who reported having capacity building and training activities together with victim support services. This is one good way that we can foster trust and cooperation, and that also we can ensure that both services have the information about how each of them works, which is crucial for survivor safety. However, we are also, of course, aware this is a complicated topic, and we are working on this ourselves as well to foster cooperation with women's support service organizations. We then took a look about survivor contact. As I mentioned in the beginning, we wanted to know, first of all, when perpetrator programs contact the survivor, if they do. And we saw here that just a little over 70% of programs contact the survivor at the beginning of the program as a procedure, which means they try to at least. However, then this number drops quite sharply to just under 50% in the course of the program and just over 50% in the end of the program. And this drop here, I really want to point out, because I will come back to it in a few slides to point out something about the risk assessment. And then we also see that 65% of the programs contact the survivor at the end. If the perpetrator drops out of their program. This is considered a high-risk situation, and this is why more programs, again, contact the survivor then. To say a little bit about what is the purpose of the contact with the survivor, 78% almost of programs inform the survivor about specific victim services that they can access. And then this number stays here around 70% of programs that include information for the survivor on the importance of safety measures, on the program for perpetrators and its contents, and also crucially on the limitations of the program, by which I mostly mean that there is no guarantee, of course, of the violence repeating, the violence not repeating as the perpetrator is in the program. And then we have a number here also under 70% of programs who contact the survivor to assess the risk and help safety plan. And while, of course, 70% is an encouraging number, we really want to point out that informing the survivor about the program, its contents, and as I mentioned, crucially, limitations, really is important to help ensure the safety and manage their expectations about the perpetrators being in the program. And this is one of the crucial responsibilities of perpetrator programs. This can be done either through a person in their own service that contacts survivors, or through a cooperation with an external women's support service, but it's really important to ensure survivor safety. And then to close off this section on survivor safety, we also had some questions about how children specifically are addressed. And here, first, I want to point out that most participants in this mapping, most facilitators, underline over and over again that being a father is one of the most important motivating factors for people who enter perpetrator programs, especially, of course, for voluntary entries, but also for those who are sent through courts. They are often really underlining that the fathering aspect and the custody aspect was one of the motivating factors. So this is something we can definitely use while working with the men. And therefore, also almost all of the programs we interviewed offer specific parenting support, either as part of their usual group program or as a separate service. And I want to connect this to the data that we have from program evaluations done using the impact toolkit, which show that the impact on children remains significant when perpetrators are in programs. And therefore, we really need to focus on thinking through specifically how everything we do in perpetrator programs can affect children's safety in the families that we work with. This is a topic we also focus a lot on in WWP. We have implemented a child protection policy, and we are holding capacity building sessions on this topic for our members. And then also more than half of the programs are not involved in any way in custody cases. This is often due to systemic obstacles or legal obstacles. There is basically no protocol for which they could participate. Around risk assessment and management, I want to show here that 70% of the programs, as I mentioned before, this would be important, contact the partner to assess the risk in the beginning of their programs. And then I pointed out this drop to under 50% in the course of the program. This can show that risk is seen as a static factor and therefore is not followed up on, but we know now that risk is a dynamic factor that can change throughout the program, and we should follow up to check for the safety of the survivor throughout. And I also, and also I want to show here that 40%, almost 40% of programs do not have a standardized procedure on conducting risk assessment with every client. For the gender perspective, we saw that almost universally everyone agrees that the gender perspective is one of the most important aspects of perpetrator work. However, only just over half of programs have a specific sessions or modules on gender roles and stereotypes and how this connects gender-based violence. And then we asked about mixed gender teams facilitating the groups to see how it's structurally integrated, and 21% have this implemented in the program. And so we see that still more capacity building is needed to ensure that a feminist transformative perspective on gender-based violence is implemented in perpetrator work. When it comes to evaluation, one of the most important findings is that it's done very often, but mostly at the end of the program, and there is no baseline evaluation or follow-up, which means that it's difficult to actually determine the efficacy of the work. And also, I want to point out that only 18.5% of the programs use standardized tools to do this evaluation. And in interviews, we often saw that programs face considerable challenges to evaluating their program, often due to a lack of funding. What sources of information are included in the evaluation? So importantly, 72% include information from sources other than the perpetrator, but 54% include information specifically from the survivor. And as the safety of the survivor is the most important goal of the perpetrator programs, this should be a crucial part of the evaluation, is to see how the survivor sees this change that took place over the course of the program, hopefully. To sum up, because I know we're short on time, I wanted to mention some of the overarching challenges that programs pointed out. First of all, of course, we know there is the lack of funding. So first of availability, but also of continuity of funds, which makes programs often unstable and also contributes to high staff turnover, which makes it more difficult to have good capacity building. And also it makes it difficult to invest in procedures and improvements. Then there's a lot of legal challenges around some of these things. In many places in Europe, there is systemic problems with cooperation. There is no emphasis on this. And it's just legally difficult to have this cooperation going. And there is, as I mentioned before, sometimes a lack of trust in information flow. Some promising practices that we definitely saw was most programs have a case-oriented exchange with women's support services and some working relationships. Most programs also offer some form of survivor support and ensure that the survivors are informed about where they can get more help. Many programs already have procedures on risk assessment, on intake, and almost all agree that the gender perspective is a crucial way, a crucial underpinning of their work with perpetrators. Almost all programs offer some sort of parenting support to perpetrators, and most of them evaluate their work in some way. Some recommendations that we see as really important to improve this safety-oriented way of looking at perpetrator work is, first of all, the increased standardization of all procedures across the board. As you saw, the use of standardized tools and for risk assessment, for evaluation, but also for protocols of cooperation and implementation of all these important features is still lacking in many programs. Kieran, Chris, and Monica all mentioned the importance of standardized tools for risk assessment, and we also wanted to really underline this, this importance. Then risk should be, as I mentioned, considered a dynamic factor and assessed continuously. Survivor support should be ongoing and an integral part of perpetrator program. It shouldn't be an add-on. It should be just as important as the actual work with perpetrators. And then the survivor's perspective should be included in both the risk assessment and evaluation of the programs. We should foster and implement a more transformative feminist approach to combating gender-based violence. And finally, capacity building is needed to ensure a clear focus on survivor safety across the board in all of these dimensions. Thank you so much. Before I go, I want to say that we are aware that there are currently not a lot of guidelines or tools for all of these things that I mentioned, all of these important areas, and we are really working to support our members on all these dimensions. We're taking steps now to prepare the standards for European accreditation. This will be launched later this year. We work to offer tools such as protocols of cooperation within the ASAP project, but also, for example, the impact evaluation toolkit. And we offer training and capacity building opportunities. And we really want to encourage our members that if you want to work on improving some part of your program, you can contact us and we can think together on how to best do this. Finally, these mappings are really a tool for us to be accountable and to learn how we can best support our members. And I want to personally thank so much all of the members who agreed to contribute their time and their effort to do these interviews and these questionnaires. We really appreciate your support. Please feel free to reach out to me if you have any further questions. But also, if you would like to receive the full report, we are currently not publishing it because we would like to publish a scientific article. However, I am happy to send it to individual people who would be interested. So please just let me know via email. That's my time. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ola. Thank you so much. There were quite a few questions coming through the chat. If it's okay, I will ask you to stick around and maybe answer the ones that haven't been answered already. I'm really looking forward to reading the mapping as well. I'm really excited to introduce the speakers for the next portion of today's event, who are joining us from Scotland, Elizabeth Hughes and Jessica Denniff from SafeLives Scotland. SafeLives are a charitable organisation working to end domestic abuse for everyone and for good within the UK. Elizabeth Hughes is a multi-agency lead for the SafeLives Scotland team, and Elizabeth leads in delivering the SafeLives Safer, Sooner programme, where the dots are joined for an effective multi-agency response by strengthening coordination and finding ways for survivors to be an active part of the process. The Safer Sooner programme aims to ensure that all victims at high risk of serious harm in Scotland, regardless of who and where they are, can access support from their local MARAC. Elizabeth has a frontline professional background working as a Caledonian system worker, and Jessica Denniff, who is the head of SafeLives Scotland and has covered this role since August 2023, has previously worked in the public protection arena as a MARAC, so as a multi-agency risk assessment conferencing coordinator in Fife, and has a policing background in England. Jess and Lizzie will be giving us a taster of what a multi-agency response to highest risk domestic abuse looks like. Welcome to both of you. You're on.
Thank you so much for that warm introduction and to Working with Perpetrators for having us today. My name's Jess Denniff.
And I'm Elizabeth Hughes. Our main aim in today's input is to support you to understand the principles of a domestic abuse multi-agency risk management conference in Scotland, known as MARAC. We want to support you to think about how MARAC might work in your own contexts, countries, and organisations.
One of the key aims of a multi-agency risk assessment conference is to understand the risk posed by perpetrators of domestic abuse and to generate effective interventions to reduce that risk. So the first MARAC started in Wales in the UK in 2003, and that was in response to the need identified by local professional agencies and domestic homicide reviews for a dedicated multi-agency domestic abuse forum. Whilst there was some great working going on across the front line at that time in response to domestic abuse, approaches tended not to be joined up or consistent, and it was hard to respond in a coordinated, safe and effective way to domestic abuse at that time.
So learning from approaches in the US and other parts of the UK, SafeLives pioneered a risk-led response and created a model that was rooted in evidence that supported improved practical responses for all professionals that may encounter victims of domestic abuse, so that victims can become safer sooner. MARACs enable agencies to share information and develop a joint action plan to increase the safety of victims and their children, and hold perpetrators accountable for their behaviour. An evaluation of the MARAC pilot showed a reduction in repeat victimisation, with 40% of survivors suffering no further abuse a year after their MARAC referral. And there are now over 300 MARACs operating across the UK, And within Scotland, every area has a MARAC, allowing a truly national joined-up approach to this work.
So moving on, we've got some figures here on the slide to give a bit of context to what domestic abuse in Scotland currently looks like. So between 2021 and 2022, there were just shy of 65,000 incidents of domestic abuse reported to the police. And Police Scotland, which is the national police force, spend a large percentage of their time on domestic abuse. 20% of Police Scotland time is spent on incidents, call-outs and work related to domestic abuse. 81% of these incidents involved a female victim and a male perpetrator. So that's 81%. We estimate at SafeLives that there are over 7,000 women experiencing domestic abuse annually at a high risk. And there are 12,500 children in Scotland living with the highest risk domestic abuse as well. So that's the context in Scotland.
A recognised response to high-risk domestic abuse is the risk-led model. A risk-led response means offering a tailor-made response for everyone experiencing domestic abuse, whatever their risk and whatever their need. It means directing them or supporting them to direct themselves along a clear route to get the right support at the earliest opportunity. And there are three essential parts to a risk-led response. So, firstly, a system for identifying who is experiencing domestic abuse, consistent access to expert domestic abuse services, and an effective joined up and collaborative approach based on a common language of domestic abuse.
So the first step to responding to domestic abuse is to correctly identify, of course, that there is domestic abuse in the first place. Alongside the knowledge needed to do this, professionals need the tools to help determine what steps are required to achieve the support and safety for victims. So one of these tools is a risk checklist or a risk assessment. Risk checklists point us towards the risks, as you would imagine, and the possible next steps that you could take. So a risk checklist gives a clear structure to capture what is happening and consistency across the response to domestic abuse. SafeLives developed a risk checklist themselves, so one version of a risk checklist, the DASH, the domestic abuse and serious harm risk checklist, stalking and harassment, so domestic abuse, stalking, harassment risk checklist over a decade ago. Any acronyms that we use in this talk, we can always elaborate on. So the DASH risk checklist was developed over a year ago with a specific aim of identifying those at high risk of serious physical harm and murder. It's based on the work of the criminal behavioural analyst Laura Richards and the academic Amanda Robertson and others who looked at available evidence around domestic murders within the UK, within the United Kingdom, pulling out the common factors. And SafeLives worked together with several agencies across the UK and other specialist services to create the DASH risk checklist, which was piloted and tested before being launched in 2009. Police Scotland use a slightly adapted version of this risk checklist or risk assessment, which you can see on the screen. There's the two there, and they refer to this as a domestic abuse questionnaire or a DAQ.
Approximately 10% of all victims experiencing domestic abuse will be at high risk of serious harm or murder. And we need to be able to identify these victims to provide a coordinated multi-agency response. Risk assessment identifies risk of serious harm and homicide and escalation in cases of domestic abuse. It ensures a proportionate response based on the severity and nature of risks and is the basis for information sharing. Risk assessments provide professionals with a common language and understanding of risk and justifies their response to abuse. When high-risk domestic abuse has been identified, using the risk assessment, the case should be referred into MARAC so that the victim receives a joined-up multi-agency response.
The next important feature of the risk-led response is specialist domestic abuse support. So the value of a good domestic abuse worker is clear, and there are many services across Scotland centred on domestic abuse to support victims. In the specific context of what we're talking about and the risk-led response and MARACs, the role of an independent domestic abuse advocate, or IDA, another acronym, is critical. The IDA is at the heart of the MARAC process and is often likened or referred to as being the victim's voice at the MARAC. They walk alongside victims who are identified as being at high risk. They have the tools to help them navigate their way through what can be a very difficult journey towards recovery.
IDAs are experts in risk assessment and will use the information from the DASH risk checklist to navigate and explore what the victim is experiencing. So they will play an active role in creating a coordinated action plan, both within and beyond the MARAC, and link with other forms of domestic abuse support, like essential longer-term recovery work. IDAs are the heart and start of the MARAC process. And in Scotland, SafeLives have led a successful accredited training course for IDAs since 2012 in partnership with Assist and Scottish Women's Aid. A robust and effective multi-agency response is the third important ingredient of the risk-led response. And this is where MARAC comes in.
Thanks, Lizzie. So what is a MARAC? At the heart of a MARAC is the working assumption that no single agency or individual can see the complete picture of the life of a victim, but all may have insights into that are crucial to the victim's safety. So a victim identified to be at high risk of serious harm or homicide needs a coordinated multi-agency response to that risk, with all the agencies sharing relevant information to develop an action plan that's comprehensible, robust, and addresses the risks identified. That's at the heart of a MARAC. MARAC provides a safe environment for agencies to share relevant and proportionate information, which means that the risks can be identified, assessed, and that the plan can be developed to manage those risks to increase the safety of the victim and their family. When agencies develop action plans at MARAC, each action must be specific, measurable, assignable, realistic, and have a time frame. And it's important that it's clear for each action who will carry it out and when. Actions are tracked and agencies are held accountable for completing these actions. A lot of this is very technical, and we'll be showing a video to back up a lot of this. So that's us talking you through what the MARAC looks like before we show you what the MARAC looks like. So just listen in and absorb some of this. So the focus on sharing up-to-date, relevant, proportionate, and risk-focused information is the focus of the MARAC, as we've said, and each case that comes to the MARAC is discussed just once, unless there's a re-referral, such as if there's a new incident or new risk identified. Cases discussed at MARAC typically last around 12 to 15 minutes from start to finish, so they're very focused and relatively quick. The primary focus of MARAC is to protect the adult victim. However, MARACs will also make links with other agencies and public protection arrangements across Scotland to protect children and to manage, crucially, the behaviour of the perpetrator.
Between July 2022 to June 2023, the 35 MARACs in Scotland discussed a total of 6,216 MARAC cases. 61% of MARAC referrals were made by Police Scotland, and 25% were made by the IDA service. This is an enduring trend we see in Scotland, and referrals from all other statutory services continue to be low overall. So this suggests that unless a victim in Scotland reports domestic abuse to the police or receives support from an IDA, they are unlikely to be referred to their local MARAC.
And here at SafeLives, we see domestic abuse as everybody's business and deliver training to a wide range of professionals on how to identify domestic abuse, how to carry out risk assessment, and how to refer to MARAC. Our training improves practical responses for all professionals encountering victims of domestic abuse, and will hopefully change this graph from having a huge bulk of police referrals into MARAC. We need everyone to be able to know, understand and refer into MARAC so that victims can become safer sooner.
So now, to understand the principles of MARAC and the risk-led response, we would like to give you a taste on what happens during a MARAC conference by showing you a mock MARAC recording, and we will also be having a group activity where you will get the opportunity to develop your own coordinated action plan.
So to understand this a little more and to get you to grips with the activity that we'll be carrying out today, there are lots of professionals involved in the MARAC process, which you might have already picked up or already know, obviously, if you've had experience of this. To ensure that the response to the high-risk domestic abuse victims and abuse in general is robust and efficient, there's two key roles that we'll be talking about within the mock MARAC that you'll hear, so within what we'll be showing you. Two specific professionals here that we've got on the slide that are vital to the operation of MARAC. Firstly, the MARAC coordinator. So the MARAC coordinator's role at a MARAC is to establish effective communication between all the parties who attend the MARAC meeting. They carry out MARAC administration duties such as circulating the MARAC agenda and the cases coming to MARAC, and also the minutes. So those who attended MARAC prior and following the MARAC meeting. They'll take notes during the meeting into the action plan and many, many more actions beyond this. There's variability across the 35 MARACs that we have in Scotland, but that's the core function of the MARAC coordinator. Secondly, we've got the role of the MARAC chair. So this is a separate role to the coordinator. The MARAC chair's role is to chair the MARAC meeting, so to host the MARAC meeting, to control and lead the MARAC meeting. They establish a process of addressing the safety of the highest risk victims of domestic abuse, and they do that in partnership with other agencies. The chair makes sure that MARAC is consistent, transparent, and accountable.
So in addition to the MARAC coordinator and chair, there are agency representatives. So these are professionals that will represent their agency throughout the MARAC process. And there are 9 core agencies that are considered crucial in public protection and risk management, who at a minimum should always be in attendance and contribute to the MARAC process. So a quick whistle-stop tour of who will be present. So these agencies are the IDA service, who represents the victim's wishes and views at the MARAC meeting. Police Scotland, who works to reduce crime and play a vital role in ensuring the communities in Scotland are safe. Child Protection Services, so they're responsible for supporting and protecting vulnerable children. We have Adult Protection Services, who are responsible for protecting adults from harm. Education Services, who enable school pupils to become confident and successful learners. Substance Misuse Services, they provide services for people who wish to recover from misusing substances. Health Services, who provide a variety of health services that are centred around health and mental health. And we have Housing Services, who help people in Scotland in the communities to live as independently as possible. And last but not least, we have Justice Services, who work with people who are going through the criminal justice system.
Thank you, Lizzie. So, as well as the core agencies, there are 4 main aims of MARAC. These are the aims that will make sure that the MARAC increases safety and reduces risk. So you can see them on the screen here. And we'll be using these aims in our activity shortly to allow us to work out and support you to develop your own coordinated action plan with these aims in mind. So the primary aim of a MARAC is to increase the safety and protect the adult victim and any child victims. And you can see that in the top left here. But we can only do this if we address the behaviour of the perpetrator, as obviously they are the crucial risk. And you can see that in the bottom right on the screen. Links need to be made between other public protection arrangements as well, which we can see in the top right here. Now, these will look different depending on the context that you work and live in, but other public protection arrangements, such as those that might relate to children and child protection, perpetrators, or vulnerable adults, and arrangements around that locally. The fourth main aim of MARAC here is for agency staff or professionals, again, whatever language fits your context best, but effectively to make sure that people who are coming across domestic abuse professionally, be they social workers, the police, etc., are protected. And as you can imagine, at MARAC, information relating to harm, not just to the victims, but to the wider public may come to light, and it's important that we pick up on that and take actions appropriately.
In the mock MARAC, which you'll soon see, you'll see agency representatives sharing up-to-date, relevant, proportionate, and risk-focused information before they are able to develop a coordinated action plan to manage the risks and increase safety as per the 4 aims of MARAC. So this is a representation of known information for each of the agencies before the MARAC conference. So the blue fields, they represent the unknown information for each of the agency representatives. And the pink represents the information that is known. A whole picture response involves bringing agencies together to see the whole picture for the whole family. Whole picture or multi-agency response involves bringing these insights together to see the whole picture of risk for the whole family. The case in the mock MARAC is completely fictional, but has been compiled using the knowledge we have on the dynamics of domestic abuse. So you will hear about incidences of domestic abuse in the mock MARAC video. So please do take care of yourself, take a break if you need to. But now, if we're ready, let's take a look at the video.
Hello everyone, welcome to Glasgow MARAC. I'll be chairing today's meeting. Before we begin, can I ask each representative to introduce themselves, giving me your job role and the agency you're representing today.
Hi, I am the MARAC coordinator and I will be taking the meeting minutes today.
Hi all, I'm the IDA today and I'll be representing the views of the victim for the MARAC cases.
Hi, I'm Brian, I'm from police, the safeguarding team.
Hi, I'm a justice social worker and a Caledonian men's worker, and I'm here to represent Justice Services.
Hi, I'm Lauren and I'm a team manager and here to represent Children and Families Social Work Services today.
Hi, I'm McKinna. I'm an adult social worker and I will be representing Adult Support and Protection Services.
I'm a head teacher and I'm here to represent Education Services.
Hi there, I'm a senior housing officer and I'll be representing Housing Services today.
Hi everyone, I'm a senior mental health nurse and I'll be representing Health Services today.
Hi everyone, I am a community-based substance misuse social worker and I'm here to represent Substance Misuse Services today.
Thanks everyone. Okay, information shared at the MARAC is governed by the information sharing protocol, which you will all have access to. Before our first case, I'm going to remind us of the confidentiality statement, so bear with me. Information discussed by the agency representatives within the ambit of this meeting is strictly confidential and must not be disclosed to third parties who haven't signed up to the MARAC information sharing protocol without the agreement of the partners of the meeting. It should focus on domestic abuse and child protection concerns, and a clear distinction should be made between fact and professional opinion. Agencies should ensure that minutes and related documentation is retained in a confidential and appropriately restricted manner. The minutes will aim to reflect that all individuals who are discussed at these meetings should be treated fairly, with respect and without improper discrimination. All work undertaken at the meetings will be informed by a commitment to equal opportunities and effective practice, issues in relation to age, disability, gender reassignment, marriage and civil partnership, pregnancy and maternity, race, religion or belief, sex and sexual orientation. So the purpose of the meeting is as follows: to share information to increase the safety, health and well-being of victims, adults and their children, to determine whether the perpetrator poses a significant risk to any individual or to the general community, to construct jointly and implement a risk management plan that provides professional support to all those at risk and reduces the risk of harm, to reduce repeat victimisation, to improve agency accountability, and to support staff involved in high-risk domestic abuse cases, including safety. The responsibility to take appropriate actions and complete them rests with individual agencies. It is not transferred to the MARAC. The role of the MARAC is to facilitate, monitor and evaluate effective information sharing to enable appropriate actions to be taken to increase public safety. By attending this online meeting, you agree to the terms of this statement. Any conflicts of interest or any issues with the confidentiality statement should be noted now. Okay. So thanks to the MARAC coordinator for compiling and circulating the agenda for today's MARAC ahead of the meeting, and the coordinator will take the minute and note the actions during the meeting today. We've got 10 cases on the agenda. The first case has been referred by Justice Social Work, the men's programme worker from Caledonian. The victim in this case is Jane Smith, who is 32 years old, and the perpetrator is her partner, Steve McDonald, who is 39. They have 2 children together, Layla McDonald, aged 5, and Lewis McDonald, aged 1 year, 5 months. The family all reside together at 6 Churchill Street, Glasgow. So as the referring agency, we'll start with Justice Social Work, who will introduce the case.
Yeah, thank you. So Steve received a community payback order on the 7th of July 2023 following a conviction for domestic assault, which was perpetrated against Jane. As a result, he currently has a supervision requirement to participate in the Caledonian men's programme, and that's to address his domestic offending, and I'm his worker for that. Jane was offered a Caledonian women's worker during the Caledonian assessment stage for Steve, but at this time she's declined any support, and again at the sentencing. On the 31st of August, however, Jane had contacted the Caledonian women's worker for support and asked if they could meet, and so the women's worker met Jane on the 7th of September at 6 Churchill Street, while Steve was at his Caledonian appointment, having arranged that with me. Jane disclosed current domestic abuse and agreed for the women's worker to carry out a risk assessment and safety plan with Jane. Jane answered yes to 17 out of the 24 questions on the risk assessment dash tool, which is obviously what led to the MARAC referral owing to the visible high risk. And so the risks are as follows. Jane is very frightened of Steve. She's frightened that he will hurt her again and that the children will see or hear this. She reports that she feels as though she's walking on eggshells every day, and that it feels the way it did right before Steve had assaulted her. Steve has strangled Jane before. She can't remember the exact dates, but says that the most recent time was when she was pregnant with Lewis. So that would be sometime late 2021, early 2022. Jane didn't report that to the police. Steve has made threats to Jane's life, and after the threats, he apologises and says that he only says these things because he's angry, and he would never actually do anything like this to Jane. Jane herself is not sure whether he would or he wouldn't. Jane feels isolated from family and friends. They didn't think that Jane would get back together with Steve after the most recent assault, and so they don't have much to do with Jane or her children anymore, so she has very little support. Steve tells Jane that she's better off without them and that she doesn't need anyone else in her life because she has him. Jane has depression and is currently taking antidepressant medication, and she didn't intend on resuming the relationship with Steve after the most recent assault in July, but felt pressurised by Steve to do so. She would like to end the relationship with Steve, but doesn't know how to do this and is worried how Steve will react. Sometimes Steve says that if Jane ever leaves him, he will take the kids away and report her to social work for being a bad mum. Other times he just threatens to kill himself. Jane says that Steve is excessively jealous and controlling. Steve accuses Jane of having an affair with the local shop manager, and he also times her whenever she goes out to the shop. Jane is not allowed to wear any makeup when she goes to the shop, and Steve has also withheld money from Jane when she does go shopping. Steve is in employment just now, but he is on a low income. Jane and Steve have a joint universal credit claim, with all the payments currently going into Steve's bank account. Jane is reliant on Steve for money. When he goes to work, Steve takes the bank cards with him to prevent Jane from spending any money. Steve spends a lot of their money on alcohol, and Jane has had to use food banks recently to get by. She is able to work. She has qualifications that she would like to use, but she feels that Steve wouldn't allow her to do that. Steve has regularly breached his bail conditions 8 times when they were in place between June 2022 and July 2023 by visiting 6 Churchill Street and being in James' company. These breaches were clustered between December and July, with the first breach occurring in December 2022. As Steve said, he had missed Jane and the kids and felt that it wasn't fair that he wasn't allowed to see them at Christmas time. Jane felt bad for him, and so she let him into the house. Following these breaches, the following breaches appeared to be motivated by Steve's desire to persuade Jane to write a letter to the courts to try and drop the charges and remove all the bail conditions. He threatened to report Jane to the police for making him breach his bail conditions, and so Jane was too frightened to report any further breaches to the police. Jane didn't disclose much about the impact of domestic abuse on the children during the Dash Rick being completed, and that's maybe something that will need further follow-up. She feels that it is getting worse, and she said that the pot feels like it's boiling over for her. Jane did state that Steve's family lived nearby, and she's scared of them as well, because they always take his side, and they also have a history of violence and weapons, including street fighting. After completing the risk assessment, the women's worker carried out a specific safety planning, but kind of felt that that was cut short by the time they had available before Steve returned. In terms of Steve's engagement with the Justice Social Work, he presents as willing to engage with the terms of the order and wants to address his offending behaviour. However, he subsequently turned up to 3 of his appointments heavily under the influence of alcohol and was sent home. We supported him to make a voluntary referral to substance misuse services to address his relationship with alcohol, but he didn't attend the appointment. He's not attended his last 3 Caledonian appointments either with us, and he's provided no explanation as to why he didn't attend. And the order is not yet at the stage of being breached. And that's all we have.
Thank you. Can I ask Ida, please, to provide us with information next?
Yeah, okay. So Jane isn't previously known to our service. I did manage to make contact with her on the 8th of September following the referral from MARAC. She was very stressed, and that was because she was worried as Steve was due home any minute and it wouldn't have been safe for her to be on the phone. So the initial conversation didn't last very long. She is aware that the case was getting discussed today. Her Caledonian women's worker had let her know, and Jane just wants all agencies to know that she is a good parent and she does the best for her children. We have agreed to meet in the office. That's the 15th of September, but Jane had to cancel this. She wasn't sure where Steve was going to be, so it wasn't safe. I have contacted the Caledonian worker to find out more about Steve's routines when he's at work and when he's on his order. So hopefully we will be able to meet safely with Jane when Steve is not around, and we'll be able to carry out the risk assessment, safety plan, hopefully look at discussing support for the children and financial support as well. We can, as always, explore refuge if that's something that Jane wants for herself and the children. Of note, when we were talking in the initial discussion, she did say that her phone use is monitored. So she does have her own phone. However, Steve will take it from her to look through her calls and texts. As a service, we would really like to support Jane, so hopefully we can. And from what we've heard, it seems like the risk is really escalating. We would be happy, as always, to link in with other professionals, in our efforts to meet with her ongoing.
Thank you. Can I come to the police next, please?
Yep. The most recent incident on record for Steve is a domestic assault, which was perpetrated in June, for which he received a conviction on the 7th of July 2023 under the Domestic Abuse Scotland Act. He did receive a community payback order with a Caledonian programme requirement, as previously stated. Prior to this, on the 26th of December 2022, there was a call out to police after reports of crashing and screaming. It was called in by neighbours. At the time, Jane declined the police risk assessment when they attended or to seek medical assistance, and Steve was arrested but ultimately released without charge. A child concern form was also submitted after this incident, as the children were present in the house at the time. In relation to the alleged breaches of bail mentioned previously, we have no reports or intel of any of these breaches during the period of these bail conditions being in place. Steve is also known to the police for several other non-domestic offences. He was convicted of a domestic assault perpetrated against a previous partner in July of 2013. Prior to this, Steve had a firearms licence which was linked to employment with a pest control company, which was ultimately working across rural areas. He does not currently have this licence, however, still works with pest control, a new employer, Pestless, the owner of which has weapons registered in his own name within the business premises. An address marker is on for a rapid response should there be any calls received to the police, and that's as much information I have at the present.
Thank you. Can I ask Housen to present next?
Yep, sure. So Jane has a sole council tenancy for 6 Churchill Street. She has been resident there since November 2015. In August 2018, the rent arrears have began to build up. We've made several attempts to contact Jane to address these arrears, but we've had no success. She contacted us on the 8th of January 2023 to set up a payment plan to gradually repay these arrears, and our records show this was going well, and Jane had cleared some of the debt until there was missed rent payments for August and September this year. At current, the rent arrears are standing at £4,344. Steve is noted as a household member only at the property, added in June 2017, and the 2 children are noted there as well. There's been no complaints by neighbours or any other relevant information that we have noted at that property. Thanks.
Thank you. Can I move to Children and Families Social Work, please?
Yes, thank you. So a child concern form was submitted by Police Scotland after the recent domestic assault incident in June 2022. We did visit Jane at home. She advised us that she was no longer with Steve and that she had no intentions of resuming that relationship with Steve. We had no concerns and the case was closed at this point. And it was noted that the home was warm, it was tidy, clean, appropriate bedrooms and toys for the 2 children observed. But it's not clear in the social work notes if Steve is having any contact with the children. A child protection concern form was received from Police Scotland in June 2020. following a domestic incident at the family home. And Jane was open about the incident on the 26th. And social work assessed that she had acted in the best interests of the child during the incident by moving to another room while Steve was shouting, smashing items, to try and minimise the child's exposure to his behaviour and abuse. She was self-blaming about not having been able to call the police herself and having to rely on the neighbours. And we have it noted in historical notes that Jane had acted protectively in the interests of her child. And that's all I have, Chair.
Thank you. Before I move on, can I just check, does anybody, any rep, know whether Steve's currently having contact with the children or not? That would be important.
Yeah, I can answer that. He moved back into the family home, so that was the minute that the bail conditions were removed in July 2023. So he's in the family home with Jane and the children.
Thanks for that. That's really helpful. Can I move to education, please?
Layla did not attend a nursery setting, so has therefore only recently become known to us when she started school in August 2023. She's still in her first term of school, and we're still getting to know her. She appears to be a quiet child, hasn't yet made any friends, but does approach other children and sits on the edge of activities. It's usually the mum, Jane, who picks Layla up. Occasionally it's Steve. Layla's teacher has observed Layla coming to school very tired on a few occasions, and this has impacted her ability to engage. Parents' evening will be in November, and Layla's teacher plans on addressing this with Layla's parents then. No safety planning has been completed, and education were not aware of domestic abuse in the home until the MARAC case list was circulated. Lewis does not attend a nursery setting as yet, as he's too young.
Is that everything?
That is everything, yes.
Thanks. If I move to health now, please.
Thanks, Chair. So yeah, Jane is known to the GP practice and has a good relationship with staff. She suffered postnatal depression after the birth of Layla and has been receiving support for her mental health around this. From myself as Jane's allocated mental health nurse. So Jane has an ongoing prescription for antidepressants. Jane and Steve engaged with the health visiting service and that's been the case with both children. So Steve has been present at every appointment in the home and presented to us as a supportive partner. Jane appears protective and loving of both her children. And there is a history of domestic abuse noted within her health records, and health visiting is aware of the incident that we've talked about in December 2022. Jane has not disclosed abuse with us or the health visitor on any occasion, with the health visitor on any occasion. And Lewis, he's meeting all his milestones, so there's no concerns for him.
Thank you. Adult support and protection?
Neither party are or have been known to adult social work.
Okay, thank you. Substance misuse?
So a voluntary referral was received by Steve, and an appointment was scheduled for the 1st of September 2023. Steve, however, failed to attend this appointment, but will have 2 further appointments booked for him before being discharged from the service. But Jane is not known to our service at all, and that's all the information I have, Chair.
Thank you. Okay, so I appreciate all the research you've done prior to the meeting, and we now have lots of information. We've got, I think, what feels like a much fuller picture, and I'm just going to summarise the risks. So we have Jane disclosing ongoing domestic abuse with a high level of control, coercion and fear, and she's disclosed that to Justice Social Work. We have risks including her level of fear. We've got strangulation. We've got threats to kill, isolation, depression, jealous and controlling behaviour. We've got threats of suicide, use of alcohol, financial abuse. We've got breaches of bail and physical abuse previously. We've also got a child under 18 months and 2 children within the home. There's also, I believe, non-domestic criminality that Steve has. And we also have fear of his family, that's from Jane. We've got risks associated with weapons, so there's firearms, and he also has previous domestic abuse offending. So we know that Jane's only recently begun to engage, and the IDA's had initial conversation, but I can't say that they've been able to do a full risk assessment safety plan. That obviously is the goal. So thinking about all of those risks then, can I ask you now to consider what your agency can provide, what you think you can offer that will identify these risks? And can I start with the IDA, please?
Yeah, I think it would be really safe practice if justice, social work and others that are aware could keep us all updated about Steve's appointments or when he's out the house, so that we can try and make as safe contact with Jane as possible. I don't see any other specific actions for us at the moment. Really need to get in contact with Jane and find out what she wants and take it from there. I'll also keep liaising with the Caledonian women's worker so that we avoid duplication.
Thanks, that's helpful, thank you. Can I just check, Justice, are you happy with that action?
Yeah, absolutely. I also think it would be a good idea for myself as the Caledonian men's worker to try and liaise with the Caledonian women's worker, just kind of a bit more closely over the coming appointments. It's likely that Steve's not yet aware that Jane has disclosed this domestic abuse, so we need to be careful within the service just to make sure that there's no service-generated risk. But we could create some space for partners to meet Jane while Steve is in his appointments. I'll discuss with my manager about possible ways to address offending in the Caledonian approach without alerting Steve to this being as a result of any disclosures that Jane's made.
Thanks. Ida.
Okay, great. Oh, sorry. Sorry, can I
No,
jump in?
go.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah, so we will make contact with the Caledonian women's worker then. I was wondering if a disclosure about Steve's previous offending with a previous partner, the disclosure scheme for domestic abuse. I was wondering if that would be appropriate to put in an application in.
I can comment on that. I've checked the systems. A disclosure of previous offending, the DS-DAS application has been applied for, so we'll take action to put that referral in within the next few weeks, and it'll be considered for a disclosure to Jane, and we'll also consider the appropriate point of offering her an alarm due to the circumstances discussed here.
Okay, thank you. Can I just go back to that a minute? So I think absolutely with the disclosure scheme, with that history of offending, she's got the right to that information. So then she can make an informed decision about that situation. However, as we know, that could come with risks around separation. So we'll absolutely need to manage that. So can I just check? So the Caledonian men's worker is going to liaise with the police about appointments as well, so that police potentially could meet with Jane while Steve's in appointments. So can I just confirm that Justice and Police Scotland are going to liaise, and so is the IDA? Yeah.
Yeah, Chair. In fact, could we make that an action for myself, please?
Yeah. Okay. Can I move to health now?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'll take an action for some additional health visitor appointments to offer support. Again, whilst being mindful that we don't want to raise suspicion that Jane's begun to disclose domestic abuse. So we want to ensure a sensitive routine inquiry is carried out, not in the presence of Steve. Obviously, he's been there all the time so far. So just to give Jane the opportunity to disclose and discuss with her health visitor privately. So I'd like to take an action for that. Thinking of staff safety as well, we'll consider whether to ask Jane to come into the office, just give her that option, consider a joint visit with another health visitor. Those kind of options. So I'll take that action and update Jane's mental health worker as well within my team that Jane's experiencing domestic abuse, if you're happy with that.
Yeah, absolutely. The health have got a real legitimacy to be in and around when others don't, so that'd be really helpful. Can I just check a time frame for those actions?
Yeah, of course. So we currently visit Jane once a month, but we'll increase that to once every fortnight. I think if you're happy with that, that would be probably what I'm thinking. And then I'll contact Jane's mental health worker within 5 days. They're on leave just now, but I can get that done within 5 days.
Okay, thanks. Anything that housing can offer?
Yeah, for sure. I'll take an action to review the rent arrears that are on Jane's property, and that'll be within the next 5 days. And then what we'll look at is maybe doing a benefit check with her to make sure that she's entitled to everything she's entitled to, and look at housing options. And what we'll do is we'll also signpost for economic abuse and debt charities too as well.
Thank you. Substance misuse? Anything from yourselves?
Yeah, I don't think there's an action for us right now. Justice could support Steve to attend the new appointment offered, but I don't think that needs action, Chair. It's part of the standard business, and we are already linked in with the Caledonian programme worker to update them about appointment dates.
Yeah, thanks. I agree. That's core business. Okay, so just to recap for the MARAC coordinator, we've got an action for housing to contact Jane around the arrears and housing options, and that would be within 5 days. Health visitors will increase the visits from monthly to fortnightly. Police will apply for a DISTAS within the week, so that's the disclosure scheme, and consider issuing Jane an alarm. Agencies will liaise with justice services around the appointments for Steve to create that safe space for Jane. And the IDA will liaise with the Caledonian women's worker to avoid duplication. Any other actions?
Chair, I don't think there's any action within adult social work, but Steve's access to firearms is a bit of a concern. And is there anything that we could do?
Absolutely, yeah, thank you. Thanks for highlighting that. Police, can I ask you what you could do around that?
Yes, I've also noted that. I'll liaise with firearms licensing regards to his access to firearms. We'll carry out a check of his business premises, and we'll conduct that within the next 5 days.
Okay, thank you. So any other actions?
Yes, Chair. So I can make sure that the case is allocated to the area team today. And given the risks identified at MARAC conference today, we'll consider whether a case conference is needed, and we'll feedback within the next 5 days. Can I just ask, is there an action for safety planning with the daughter, with Layla as well?
Yes.
Can I check that? Oh, apologies, I was just coming to you.
I was so ready because there definitely is. We'll take an action to safety plan in an age-appropriate way with Layla. This will be done as part of a whole class input on who the children can speak to when they need to in school. We can also offer Jane use of the school office phone if ever needs to make calls from there. This will be actioned at next week's school assembly.
Thank you. Justice?
The Caledonian women's worker can speak to Jane about the Caledonian Children's Service and explore if it might be beneficial for her to get some ongoing support for Layla by one of our children's workers. And if Jane supports that, then we can refer Layla into the Caledonian Children's Service, and we could probably do that within the week. There may also be something around the potential breach of the order. There might be an opportunity there to kind of expedite a review of that and return the order to the courts for a review. Chair, could you add that as an action for myself to investigate a wee bit further, and I could maybe do that within 14 days, if that's okay?
Yep, that's a really helpful action, and I'm just thinking that could have some risk attached if he is returned to court. So again, I know you're going to liaise, people are going to liaise after this meeting, but that would be important to consider. So in terms of anything else, I just would want to add, I've been thinking about that kind of risk warning marker for worker safety with Steve. So I would expect that to be applied to his workplace and the home address as required. And as you know, an additional action for all agencies is to flag and tag your systems so that we know that this is a MARAC case and domestic abuse is present. Coordinator, have you got all of those actions?
Yeah, thanks. I have all actions noted so far, but can we just discuss who will be providing feedback from the MARAC to Jane, please?
Yeah, absolutely. Who are we thinking?
Yeah, as Ida, I would like to take that role.
Yeah.
I'll try and get a safe meeting with Jane in the office so that we can fully safety plan and I can give her the feedback from the meeting. Also, if there are any other tasks that agencies have that I can support communicating to Jane, please let me know. I'm concerned about that we all overwhelm Jane with lots of new people involved. So if everyone can be really mindful to try and safely and carefully contact Jane, especially as Jane's trying to manage that safely herself, given her fears around Steve monitoring her phone. So if everybody can note in their systems as well, not to leave voicemails or send text messages. Yeah, so we know that increased agency contact could increase the risk in this situation and could be difficult for Jane to manage. So if it's okay, if I can go back to Jane with some of the actions that have been canvassed today instead of each agency going back and trying to make contact. For example, I could canvass the alarm from the police. And then once I've canvassed Jane's views, I'll be able to get back in touch with agencies directly. If
That makes
okay
sense. Yeah, so can we ask that the phone number, I think it'd be helpful for your number to be noted in the action plan, if the coordinator could do that, please. So I think that's everything. I want to thank you all for attending MARAC, and just check before we finish up that everyone's content to move on to the next case, that everyone agrees that we've taken actions that will mitigate the risks identified, that we're protecting the adult victim and her children, that we're protecting agency staff, that we've made links with other public protection arrangements, and we've addressed the behaviour of the perpetrator. So if everybody's content with that and happy that we've done that, then I'll move on.
Perfect. So hopefully after watching the mock MARAC, you can see how bringing all of the agencies together to piece their insights together has helped all of us to see the whole picture of the life of the victim. So seeing the whole picture makes it possible, to identify all of the risks and for a robust action plan to be put in place. So everything we've been talking about this morning, you would have seen in that video, hopefully. In terms of what we have next coming up, we now have 15 minutes together to put together a European coordinated action plan based on the aims of MARAC. So we'd like you to approach this activity from your own contexts, countries, and organisations. And in the chat stream, you'll find an easy retro board link. This is just a piece of software. Some of you might have used it before. If you could click on that, it will open the board up, and we'd like to collectively as a group develop an action plan so that the 4 aims of MARAC that I talked you through around the victim, the perpetrator focus, the risks to the agencies, agency members of staff, and making links with other public protection arrangements, all there in columns, and we'll be able to collaboratively think about some of the actions that you might take off the back of seeing that activity. And Lizzie, I can see it on the screen there. So,
okay. So once you open up the link that is in the chat function, at the top of the board, you will see headings. These headings have been based on the 4 aims of MARAC. All you need to do is click on the add or plus button underneath each heading so that you can start adding actions to the action plan. So what we'd like you to think about is what resources your organisation has, the organisations that you partner with. Think about what the resources the local organisations have that you might not partner with, but you are aware of. What do they have that will reduce risk and increase safety?
So I can see these coming up already, which is brilliant. And I would completely agree about addressing the behaviour of the perpetrator, having a funded programme available to refer into. So if you've got a concerning behaviour of a perpetrator, which at a MARAC you always will, just given the fact it's come through MARAC at that high risk level, having funded programmes to refer into is a really strong idea. Potentially under that, there's one that is a local programme within a country and context that I'm not familiar with, but I'm imagining that we're popping up here with that as well. Lots of things coming in, Lizzie, so I'll let you pick some out.
I just wanted to say, if somebody has left a comment, if they put an action on the board and you think, yes, that is absolutely fantastic, you can give that person a thumbs up. So there is reactions underneath the boxes for each of the actions, so you can give people a thumbs up. And what you can also do, this next to the thumb is a speech bubble. You're able to click on the speech bubble and that should open up another box where you can leave a comment. So what I'd like us to do is to build on this action plan. So where there are some actions, think about, could these actions be done in a joined up way? So could they involve two agencies working collaboratively, working together to ensure the safety of that victim or address the perpetrator's behaviour? So if there's any joined up actions that you can think of, please add some additional comments on there as well. But this is looking absolutely fantastic. Okay. So I'm going to pick some of these actions here now, and so there's one here, the school being aware. Oh, it's moved. The school being aware to allow for additional support. So for that one, can we have a think? Can we expand on that? When will that action be carried out? Who will carry out that action? So we need to make sure that these actions are assignable. So we need to ensure that who is going to be taking the lead on this action is identified as part of that action plan. We also need to make sure that each of the actions are timed. So what is the time frame for that action to be completed?
So there's some great ones being added to the one that you picked out there, Lizzie, around schools being aware to allow for additional support. So that would be for children in their school who have been discussed as part of the MARAC. Some comments under there could be carried out by the teacher that's closest to the child or knows the child best as soon as possible. Your question around who else that might link into, we've got Child Protection Service or Children's Social Work, which would absolutely be right if the concerns were there. So people are really thinking about this in the way that we would expect at a Scottish MARAC, which is fantastic. There's so much coming in on the boards around protecting child victims, which is really positive. Also around addressing the behaviour of the perpetrator, which makes sense given this conference, and is fantastic. So just to pick out some of these that are particularly interesting for me, increased focus on jealousy and alcohol in individual sessions could be done without increasing service generated risk, as they'd be part of the programme anyway. So that's relevant if we've got a perpetrator of domestic abuse on an intervention or justice intervention, tailored sessions to pick up some of the risks identified in the MARAC, and really good to see people thinking about not increasing service-generated risk there. For those that might not use that term in their own practice, we're talking here about not creating more risk by alerting a perpetrator that that their partner or ex-partner might have started to disclose domestic abuse. So obviously, if you went in with a less subtle or thoughtful approach and start talking about alcohol or very specific offending, then that could give away that somebody has started disclosing domestic abuse. So we need to be very careful around that. Great to see that coming through. Lots and lots of things on the children's stream, slightly less so on the last two, protecting agency staff and making arrangements with public protection arrangements. So in terms of public protection arrangements, some good comments in here around integrating perpetrator programs within the multi-agency meetings. We can talk about that potentially in the questions as well when we have time at the end. Referring to disclosure scheme, it's great to see that pop up again. Some of this is quite technical, but some of this is nice and broad as well, and hopefully is giving food for thought, regardless of where you've come from today. Lizzie, are there any others that you'd like to pick out from some of the other streams?
Well, what I'd like is, this is a really, really good start. All of the streams are filling up with actions, which is absolutely amazing. So just like the one about the school being aware to allow for additional support, can we now start adding some, assign the other tasks, the other actions to some agencies, to some individuals, and can we also give them some timeframes as well? And what would be really, really good is if we could start thinking about some of these actions, what might the challenges, what might be the barriers in putting these actions in implementing the actions. And also, you know, you mentioned the service generated risks. What might the service generated risk be for putting the action into place? So what I really like to see the audience doing now is to add some more comments for some of the other actions on those points. So for example, we've got refer to disclosure scheme here, which is absolutely fantastic. Who do you think would be the right person to make that referral to the disclosure scheme? What is the time frame? When should that referral be made? Consider what the challenges or the barrier might be in putting that referral in, and would there be, you know, any service generated risks that would need to be considered?
So I can see more and more coming onto this, Lizzie, around making sure that no professionals' contact information is shared at the meeting. So some of this is back to protecting agency staff just for now, but we're still talking about risk here. And underneath that, you've got a comment, all about MARAC is confidential. So all the information about MARAC is kept confidential. There's always questions that we receive in about how information is stored, shared and governed at the MARACs. And again, there'll potentially be questions around that later. But again, that's crucial to that risk, is about keeping the information confidential. Avoiding restrictive decisions that are made by individuals or one person when absolutely needed, again, speaks to that. There's some really interesting ones coming in around links with other public protection agencies, again, arrangements, which was the column that we had a little bit less information on. So inclusion of indirect services. So the comment is including indirect services so they can use their own powers, housing, local authority. that is about, when we've seen the MARAC video together, and as Lizzie and I have talked about throughout our presentation, the 9 core agencies that come along to the MARAC would include housing and have links to the local authority. So when we say local authority, we're talking about council areas or local government. But it's about being clever and creative about thinking where else we can get some of these powers from. So if a housing provider can make a visit, because we think that that would be a safe way to check that the victim's okay, or to get information to them, then that is a possible action that could be taken from the MARAC, and it's great to see that coming through here. So whilst we need to be careful about how we're tasking things at the MARAC, and we would only want professionals that know exactly what they're doing and feel safe going to do a visit like that, that is a really creative task, and it is one that we would see at MARACs. So great to see that coming through. Lizzie, is there anything else you want us to pick out in these?
Yeah, I've just been having a read, and there's one action here that I'm really drawn to. So this is in the stream about protecting the adult victim, and it says to recognise any additional risk that might be related to the culture, religion, sexuality, for example, you know, protected characteristics, because we do know that there's risk. These characteristics potentially could increase risk for individuals, and also there might be additional challenges and barriers for these individuals to access support services, for example. Is the material resources, are they in their language? Is there an interpreter? So I'm really drawn to that one. And also I'm drawn to the action to arrange appointments in a safe space. I think that's really important to make sure that the victim, this is all carried out in a safe space, that victim is not overwhelmed. I think when quite often what we hear is that the victims that are referred into MARAC, they didn't have any services involved prior to the MARAC meeting. And then after MARAC, you've got the 9 core agencies have all carried out actions, and then suddenly there's a lot of agencies and professionals involved in that person's life, which can be incredibly overwhelming. And that, you know, if it's too much for them, that might then stop them from engaging, from you know, their future engagement with services. It might stop them from wanting to work with agencies moving forward if it's all a little bit too much. So we have got 4 minutes left of putting our action plan together. I really like these comments, which are considering about the service generated risks and what the barriers might be, such as a barrier from children's services could be refusing to take on a case as they believe it doesn't meet their risk threshold.
There's some here as well, Lizzie, that have got multiple thumbs up, just to pull them out and bring the audience back in. In terms of protecting the adult victim, one of the key things that multiple audience members have put on the board here is IDA safety planning. So that's the independent domestic abuse advocate who you saw in the video, the victim's voice, as we've said, often referred to, and the person who best advocates for them during the meeting, as we all do. So IDA safety planning is in there with several thumbs up in the protecting adult victim column, which is great to see, and would wholeheartedly agree with, is crucial at the absolute heart of the MARAC. In terms of protecting child victims, in that column, in the purple, contact with children's services, schools being aware to allow more support is great to see those getting the thumbs up as well. So children's services and schools being 2 crucial links there, but not the only 2 links. We could also think about health visitors, midwifery services, etc., also crucial to that aim of MARAC. In the addressing the behaviour of perpetrators, and I think the one with the most thumbs up across all the boards, we've got having a funded programme able to refer to at the MARAC to really make sure that when we acknowledge that there's behaviour that's incredibly dangerous, and creating risk, we can do something with it. So that's great to see there, and that the audience are identifying that. A couple of others in that column: earlier intervention to address behaviour, so primary prevention, early intervention, sorts of comments coming in there, absolutely. Getting in there as soon as possible when dangerous behaviours are identified. We've also got probation mentioned in there, so a service that potentially hasn't come up yet in our discussions, but great to see that too. Probation, prison service, another arm to the justice system within Scotland and across the UK. In the protecting agency staff column, we've kind of got thumbs up across a couple of things across the board, so nowhere coming through is very, very strong, but blended model to access support and keep staff safe, ensuring information shared between agency staff, which is absolutely crucial. So that sharing information is really, really key. Making links to other public protection arrangements, we've got there the two key ones coming through are the disclosure scheme, or referring to a disclosure scheme, which we can go into in the Q&A as and when we have time to discuss what that might look like, but you heard that in the video as well. And advocating for integrated perpetrator programs at these multi-agency meetings too. So really great to see that, and fabulous that we've got comments coming in across the board on all of those aims of MARAC. Lizzie.
So one last thing for me, because that's our 50 minutes. There's a comment here in the purple stream. Do schools need specialist input or training regarding domestic abuse risks and mitigation? So what we say at SafeLives, this is our belief, is that domestic abuse is everybody's business, and the responsibility of tackling domestic abuse shouldn't fall to one or two agencies. So across the board, what we would like to see is everybody to receive domestic abuse training, everybody to be able to identify domestic abuse as they may come into contact with victims. We would like them to be able to carry out the risk assessments and to be able to refer into MARAC, so that there's not any missed opportunities where victims can fall through the gaps and the domestic abuse might not be picked up. So absolutely, we would encourage schools, health reps, children's services, all across the board to have domestic abuse training. Thanks, Jess. So I will now swap screens and we'll get back to our presentation.
Thanks, Lizzie, and thanks to everyone for coming in on that and contributing so much to that discussion. It's fantastic to see. In terms of where we're going next, just to wrap up the final part of our presentation and then to be joined by speakers and answer questions around perpetrators or anything that you've seen today, and to link these things together, we'll just jump back to our slides. In terms of the MARAC process, I think it's really important to underline at this point that the MARAC meeting that you've seen is not the whole process. There's multiple parts around that meeting that are really key to draw out. So the MARAC meeting is one part of a wider MARAC process. It starts at the point where domestic abuse has been correctly identified, a DASH risk assessment or risk assessment is completed, and that high risk domestic abuse is identified. And then it's referred into the MARAC, where lots of information gathering and collation and sharing is then done at the meeting. So you'll see all that information gathering. We won't have seen that in the video, but you'll know that that has to have gone on in order to bring that to the MARAC meeting. And that's where the risk management actions are implemented, which again, we saw in the video. Throughout the MARAC, the IDA is that key link between the victim and the MARAC process, ensuring that their views are heard and that their safety is at the heart and start of the process at every point. The IDA also keeps the victim updated, ensuring that the victim's supported throughout and that their needs are represented at the MARAC is crucial to managing risk, but also improving and maintaining safety for the victim and reducing repeat victimization. So somebody coming through the MARAC multiple times or being exposed to further domestic abuse. Lizzie.
MARAC has a stable, visible governance structure in place, and this provides leadership for the MARAC and IDA response. So as a result, agencies work together more effectively and the MARAC is accountable. Effective multi-agency working is more than sitting around a table, whether that is a literal table or a virtual online table, to share information. Relationships that are built through MARAC galvanize partners to come together beyond that process, using the same language of risk, working with the same tools and striving towards a common goal to put victims and their families on a path to long-term safety and recovery. We need all agencies to identify and refer into these processes, and the shared understanding of domestic abuse and risk allows us to respond sooner and help victims to become safer. So domestic abuse must be seen as everybody's business, so that victims get the support that they need sooner and receive a coordinated, robust response to risk, which is based on their individual circumstances.
So Lizzie and I wanted to thank you both for allowing us to present our slides and the information around MARACs, as well as that video. And I believe now that we've got time for Q&A, so I'll hand back over to Isotta. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Jess and Lizzie. That was really, really interesting. Thank you for really giving us a flavor of what a MARAC looks like in practice. And I really love the interactive exercise too. So as you said, we're moving on to Q&As, but before we do so, I'd like to introduce two speakers who are joining you on stage, on this virtual stage, to answer the audience questions. So we have Gill McKinna and Fionna McMullen. Gill McKinna is head of the Caledonian System National Team. For those of you who are not aware, the Caledonian System is an integrated approach to address men's use of abusive behavior towards female partners. It consists of a court-mandated men's behaviour change programme with integrated women's and children's services and is accredited by the Scottish Advisory Panel for Offender Rehabilitation. But I'm sure Gill will be able to tell us a little bit more about this too. Gill's academic career includes a degree in social work and a master's degree in psychological trauma studies. She has extensive experience working within Scotland's justice system and has spent the majority of her frontline social work career specialising in the delivery of the Caledonian system. Welcome, Gill. Fionna McMullen is operations manager at Assist. Having trained in youth and community work, Fionna worked in a criminal justice setting for a number of years before joining Assist as an advocacy worker in 2004. Assist provides advocacy and support to victims and child witnesses with cases going through criminal courts across most of the west of Scotland. Fionna's held a number of roles within the service, and she's currently an operations manager. As part of this role, Fionna regularly chairs MARACs. Fionna is also an associate trainer for SafeLives, and on behalf of the organization, she has delivered training to a number of services. Again, welcome to all of you. We have a little bit more time for question. We have over 20 minutes, which is amazing because we had quite a few questions come through. If it's okay for you, I will read out each question and then perhaps you may decide amongst yourselves who will take the question, and you're always welcome to add on to each other's response, of course. Hope that works for you. Okay, so our first question is from Bex. How can we be certain that the reported reduction in repeat victimization is not, perhaps in a proportion of cases, due to survivors not reporting any further incidents due to the dynamics of domestic abuse? Who would like to chip in?
I'm happy to talk to that a little bit, but I'm sure people will add to it. I shall talk slowly. And we can't. The bottom line is we can't always be sure if people will continue to report. And that will often depend on whether they see their safety being increased by the MARAC process, but also by our criminal justice process if it's going through court. So what we have in place is the ability to refer back into MARAC under repeat criteria if within 12 months of MARAC there's been a further incident, unreported or otherwise. So that's very likely to come to the IDA, the Independent Domestic Abuse Advocate, where the victim says, I'm not reporting to the police. I don't think it's going to help me. I'm exhausted by this criminal justice process, but there are additional risks. So the MARAC process will sit outside that criminal justice process. So it doesn't cover everything in terms of further reporting, but it is a check and balance that's in place in terms of making sure that we're continuing to work. It's like Jess said, the MARAC is an intervention, it's a process, it's not just the meeting. So that engagement with the IDA, the Independent Domestic Abuse Advocate, is crucial to managing risk and safety until it reduces, and that will take into account continued abuse from perpetrators and their persistence. And we should see that coming back into the MARAC, if so. Don't know if you want to add to that, Jess.
I think that was perfectly said, Fiona. I would just add, for those that might not have picked up during the MARAC presentation, some of a real strength to MARAC is that a victim doesn't have to report to the police. They could disclose domestic abuse to any number of agencies or professionals, and that's what Lizzie and I are talking about when we say it's everybody's business. But we have the best possible chance of picking up further incidents of domestic abuse across the board, across all of those agencies, rather than it just being reported through the police. So that is one plus to that. You know, a victim could go to the health visitor, a child's school, the IDA, any number of agencies, and it would still be picked up as a repeat or a further incident that we could take back to the MARAC, as Fiona says. So that's a real strength.
Brilliant. Thank you. We had another question from Sop Pagan. I am sorry for butchering your name. Is there any modified dash for elderly victims? Regular dash leaves them out very often.
So I can speak to this one. This is a really good question, and I'm glad that we were asked it. So we know from our own research at SafeLives that victims over the age of 60, different definitions of elderly victims, but we know that victims over the age of 60 take a longer time to disclose domestic abuse than younger victims for several reasons. And there is an awareness across the sector that we work in around this, and a lot of ongoing conversations. In terms of especially adapted dash, there are examples of those across the UK, but at a local level, there is guidance at SafeLives of the older people's kind of care and referral pathway. So there is information out there around working with older victims of domestic abuse and research around exactly the dynamics of that. But in terms of a modified dash, that is sort of, there are a few examples at local levels rather than a SafeLives specific one.
Could I come in there as well, just from a practice, a frontline point of view? So as an IDA, or as an IDA service, when we apply dash, we've got those absolute questions that we must ask that are linked to, you know, our research into homicide, etc. But the skill of the IDA will be in probing around those questions. So as an example, if I was asking about isolation and I was asking that to a victim who was older, I'm thinking, are you isolated? And what are the ways that you're isolated? And how does that link to you being older, if you see what I mean? And I would do that with all those questions. I would think, through a lens of an older person, how is this applying? Is this more acute? Are there links to disability, for example, that will increase isolation even further? So that's very much about, we can identify, dash can be used by a non-specialist service, but the referral pathway for a high-risk victim will be an IDA service that will understand lots of different client groups, younger, older, Black and minority ethnic groups, and how those questions need to be probed further to think about the risks and manage that safety plan that will come following the dash.
Thank you so much. Jess and Gill, feel free to come in at any point for the other questions too. We had another question from Brian. Brian was wondering whether perpetrator programs are not represented at the MARAC meetings. We also had somebody answer that in the chat, saying that locally, in her experience, they were represented, but perhaps you'd like to comment on this and give a little bit more information to Brian and our audience.
Yeah, I can start answering that one. So the Caledonian system is available in 19 local authorities across Scotland. That's covering approximately 70% of the population. And Caledonian workers will be represented at the MARAC meetings. Now, I'd like to say a bit about the preparation that goes on in the Caledonian for the MARAC meetings and in the Caledonian system. We have a process built in called client liaison meetings. Now, in the video they were touched on, and in this process, men's workers and women's workers, so the women's support worker and the children's workers, meet a minimum of once every 4 weeks to discuss the risks associated with this case. Now, if something significant happens in the case, they will meet sooner, but even if all seems quiet, they will still meet a minimum of every 4 weeks. And then this information can be progressed onto MARAC if it's deemed necessary as well. So I think it's really important for anyone that's considering how can we develop something like this further, that you have a process built into your system where workers have a safe space to meet and discuss the case as a whole.
Thanks, Jill. Anybody else want to add on to that?
I would just echo that to say that it might be that a perpetrator programme, the person fully involved in the case will come along to just that case at the MARAC and then leave afterwards. So one of the benefits, very few benefits of COVID, but that MARAC has moved to Teams, and we do that online, and that's actually been a positive in terms of attendance and people being able to come in for a 15-minute conversation and then leave. And often that's what the man's worker would do if they've got a locus in 1 out of 27 cases, for example.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Right, the next question is from Sylvia. She wants to know if perpetrators get access to MARAC minutes if they do an ICO subject access request, as they may be using this to gain access to information on their ex-partners from agencies. Even if this info is redacted, they could put 2 and 2 together based on the information they may receive about their data, which they then may use for stalking victims and professionals.
I can speak to that one, but I'd welcome thoughts from everyone else. This is the problem that Sylvia is highlighting here, or the risk, is one that MARAC coordinators, SafeLives, and anyone involved in the MARAC process are acutely aware of and have lots of things in place to prevent this happening. So to answer the kind of couple of questions that Sylvia's put there, can perpetrators get access to MARAC minutes if they do a subject access request? For those that from an international audience, these might be different terms. So a subject access request is when an information, obviously around GDPR and otherwise, can request information held on them as an individual and receive information back. Depending on where the information is stored relating to MARAC, which can vary at a local level, and again, we can talk about that, there's often questions around this. A decision would have to be made by a data controller in the local area around what is proportionate to release, how that is done, and in many cases, none of it is released. So where there's a MARAC perpetrator within that information, we would be extremely careful about releasing the absolute minimum, if anything, in these cases, for exactly the reasons Sylvia puts here, stalking victims and professionals. But Fionna and Jill, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
No, I think just to say though, as someone that covers a lot of MARACs and a lot of local authorities, it's been less of a challenge than perhaps I expected. It's something we see come along very, very rarely, thankfully.
Good to hear. We have a really interesting question from Anna next. I think a question that many people in our audience are eager to hear an answer to. What would be the first steps that professionals could take to try and introduce a MARAC or similar in a country where this is not happening yet? Who would like to give it a go?
I would imagine we'll all like to speak to that because it's a great question. I'm putting us all on the spot there, but I definitely would like to speak to it. So first steps that professionals could take to try and introduce a MARAC in a country where it's not happening yet. Great question. I think I can only speak to how MARAC's developed in the UK, and as we've touched on in our presentation, that came about from there being an identified need. So that need was that there were domestic abuse homicides taking place, and it was being found that they were taking place because information sharing was not happening to prevent that. So victims were having to say time and time again to multiple different services, this is happening to me, and none of that information was being joined up, or not enough of that information was being joined up. So that's what we spoke to about MARAC, kind of beginning in its earliest form in Wales within the UK in sort of 2003 time. They developed in some cases quite organically after that. So the UK is just one sort of picture of how this looks. And that was just from the desperate need for more of a process in place around this, about domestic abuse being taken seriously, identified and correctly, information shared correctly around it. For me, in terms of how that's developed from then to now, and specifically in Scotland, you really need to get the right people around the table to get that buy-in, that strategic buy-in, the will to set something like this up and to carry it on sensibly, safely, and with a level of consistency so that it will just continue. Sustainability. You also say SafeLives' role in this and the evaluated risk-led model, and getting resources that could ensure and support people to set up MARACs in a kind of consistent way is crucial as well. So having that sort of guidance around the process is crucial. To answer your question, Anna, I think it's important to think about, you'll be the expert about what's available locally to you, so where you might best take this idea and say, I've heard about this really interesting process, I think it might work for us. That's going to look different depending on where you're based, and I don't know where you're based. But that to me is kind of crucial. Finding the right people to talk to about this locally would be key for me.
And if I can add to that from perpetrator programme perspective, we have found in the Caledonian system that working very closely with our children and families colleagues helps this process, because they have a lot of information to provide at MARACs. And what we recommend doing is sort of allocating a sort of a key worker from your perpetrator programme to support children and families workers in each local authority. So one worker for each area, and to go and do inputs on your perpetrator programme to your colleagues, so they understand that the work that you're doing, but also so that they've got a person that they know and that they can actually email. We've found that helps significantly, having a worker allocated to each local authority to do that.
Brilliant. Anybody else wishing to chip in? If not, I will move on to the next question from Terry. Terry asks, does the victim have to give permission for a MARAC to be held? Breach of confidentiality. What does the police do when being informed of a new crime? Who would like to take that? Perhaps Fiona, any of the others?
I'll take that one from SafeLives' point of view. I also can't see Fiona, so I'm not sure if she's dipped off.
Oh no.
I think she actually might be back. So there we go. We've summoned Fiona back in that way. Yes. So in terms of great question to ask, and one that we would often get asked, is does the victim have to give permission for the MARAC to be held? So really glad that one's come up. And a secondary one around what the police would do with information heard at MARAC, which we can also cover. So
Sorry, Jess, will I start with what we do frontline around that? Would that be helpful?
Yeah, that would be ideal.
Sorry, because I haven't heard the pre-chat. So in terms of permission for MARAC, no, consent is not required for MARAC because the level of risk outweighs confidentiality. However, there's a part before when an organisation, a professional in an organisation is considering what's happening to a victim, either by applying DASH or asking about domestic abuse, then that's where consents must be sought before you're taking information around that, so that the victim's very clear that what might come out of that is a referral to MARAC. And that's where the victim's autonomy lies, if you like. So consents pre any conversation about risk are really important. So the victim knows and knows that by telling this, it might go somewhere. There's the rare occasion when we believe that not telling the victim, and we want to tell the victim because we want to partner with them in managing the risk. We don't want to do to them. We want to take them along with that process, and we want to make the safety plan incredible, and that involves them being part of it and saying what will work and not work for them. So there will sometimes be the very rare occasion where the risk will be so high to tell the victim that we wouldn't tell them that we're taking it to MARAC. So consent and knowledge, if you like, are two different things. And that reduces what MARAC can do in terms of safety planning. So that's a real exception. So that's again where the role of the IDA comes in. Housing perhaps have done a dash, identified high risk. They've explained before they've done the dash that this could go to MARAC. The IDA reiterates that, explains in more detail what the meeting's about, and takes the victim's views to that meeting. So it's very much partnering with them around the safety plan and the risk management. And again, I would say that I've been in a service for 20 years and had very little resistance to a case being discussed at MARAC. If you can explain really well and people feel like they knew about that in advance and engaged in that, and you can explain well what that meeting's going to do for someone or hopes to do for someone, then there's very little resistance to that. And again, post MARAC, you're feeding back and you're working with someone until risk reduces. So victims see it as an intervention rather than a one-off meeting. I don't know if people want to add to that.
That was a great summary of it, Fiona. I'd just highlight the fact that, again, it is a strength of the MARAC that we can hear cases ranging from where we have a victim's fully on board and saying there is domestic abuse, I need as much help as possible, but also with victims who they're not there on their journey yet, and we've identified that there's high risk and we still need to do something with it. So that's where not needing consent becomes especially useful given some of the extremely high risk cases we're talking about here.
Good point. And also, shall I go on to the second part of the question around what the police do when being informed of a new crime? So one of the key tasks at MARAC is for every organisation to flag and tag their files, to make sure that they know that a case has been discussed at MARAC. So for the police, that would mean if a new crime was reported and that was in 12 months of MARAC, then they would refer that back in to the meeting, to the next meeting. And that would, if the IDA was no longer engaged with the victim, that would restart that IDA engagement again and the offer of that. So that's what the police would do in terms of learning of new risks and reported crimes.
Thank you. We have a little under 5 minutes left, so I'm going to try to get to some of the other questions, and if we don't manage to answer them, then you feel free to stick around and answer them in the chat. So John is just asking where she could find more data, if there is any research or evaluation that has been done concerning the Caledonian system. I believe this one is for Gill.
Yep, so Ipsos Mori did an external evaluation of the system in 2016. You can Google it and you'll find that online. Email me at jill.mckinna@communityjustice.scot and I can send you that. Scottish Government also commissioned an internal evaluation in 2021 by Progressive, and the efficacy of the Caledonian system is also referred to in WWP's expert papers, which can be accessed on the WWP website.
Thanks a lot, Jill. Right, so 2 more questions if we manage. Question from Anna: is the MARAC also a place where other agencies could support the perpetrator program to reach the perpetrator somehow if contact hasn't been established yet? Who would like to give this a go?
I can answer very basically to this and say that there's lots of information that comes from organisations at MARAC that aren't necessarily domestic abuse specialists, but have, are involved because of addiction, are involved because of mental health, and often the information we get at MARAC supports contacting victims that we haven't been able to get to, but also perpetrators as well. So that information can be shared and can be used safely to contact someone. So yes, it can be.
And I would just echo what Fiona said, and just adding to that, in Scotland, the referral process to the majority of perpetrator programmes comes through the court system. So there are voluntary programmes in place, but not across the whole of Scotland. So the majority of our perpetrator work is done through court-mandated programmes.
Right, thank you. Sheila is asking how you sustain multidisciplinary input and commitment to MARAC process, as MARAC is not a statutory requirement.
So that's a great question. I'll speak to that one first. So in terms of it not being statutory, that's absolutely right. We may have said that, we may have not. MARACs do not have to operate. They operate at a local level and across Scotland. As we said, there is a MARAC in every local authority area of Scotland. That's not the case across the wider UK, but there are just around 300 MARACs operating across the UK as a whole. And I think it's absolutely remarkable that they've developed and been sustained through not being statutory. And I think that's testament to how much support there is for MARACs and a recognition of the model across the UK. So a message that comes up continuously for us is that there is strong support for MARAC across Scotland. I think that's key, because that is part of how you sustain that commitment to MARAC is people believing that it's a worthwhile process to invest in and carry out. In terms of how you sustain it, there's commitment and buy-in for MARAC at a strategic level, kind of nationally in Scotland, in a number of ways. So MARAC is kind of built into our national strategy around violence against women and girls, which is Equally Safe from 2014. It's also built into policies and procedures and has been over time. So it's kind of organically built up, apologies, and it is there. I think what is remarkable is just how they have developed organically without that statutory requirement. As you can imagine, because of that, there's an issue regarding capacity, time and resource, which really varies between local levels because there isn't that statutory requirement, and there is that variability locally around quite how much resource each MARAC has. Some have much more than others, they operate in different ways, and so on. So you could get a MARAC coordinator who's full-time and chairs who have got enough time to do the job properly, but you can also get areas where a coordinator might be doing those duties on top of a full-time job and a chair as well doing a full-time job as well. So there are issues there that have correctly been identified, and there's conversations around the statutory requirement to MARACs anyway. The SafeLives kind of have their Safer Sooner network around embedding MARACs nationally, hosting networks which can pull some of that together. But as I say, there are ongoing conversations around statutory requirements.
Thank you. If there aren't any final remarks, anything that you'd like to add, I think we can close off this amazing panel. Thank you so much. You shared a lot of rich information, and I'm sure everybody's really inspired and really grateful for your time. Thank you, thank you.
Can I ask one thing? I saw a question around, and it's maybe been answered, I dropped off, the question around MARAC and MATAC, was that answered? Yeah.
No, it wasn't, but if you want to get back to it in the chat, it would be really appreciated.
I'll do that.
Thank you so much, Fiona.